200 people, one marble floor, and a woman standing in the center of it with her purse turned upside down in a stranger's hands. Nothing falls out, a phone, a tissue, a stick of gum, no beauty moves. Because the man who ordered the search is smiling, because his wife is still pointing. Because somewhere in this ballroom, a bracelet worth more than a house is sitting in plain sight. And only one person in the room has noticed. She's wearing gray, flat shoes, no jewelry. She drove herself here. They decided what she is. They decided 2 years ago. Get out, Garrison Whitmore says. You don't belong under this roof. Her husband is being held back by a guard. The cameras are already up. The candles are burning low, and outside, at the end of the long dark driveway, a pair of headlights turns through the iron gate. Slow, unhurried. Nobody in that room hears the car door shut. The first thing you need to know about Nora Caldwell is this. She arrived in a Honda Civic. A 2019 Honda Civic with a dent on the rear bumper and a pine tree air freshener that had stopped smelling like pine 14 months ago. She parked it herself. No valet. She waved the young man off before he even reached the door handle. And she did it with a smile that made him feel like he'd done something right instead of something unnecessary. He stood there for a moment after she walked away, watching, trying to figure out what had just happened. Something had happened, he just couldn't name it yet. The second thing you need to know, she was wearing gray, not silver, not charcoal, not slate, gray, the kind of gray you find on a sweater that has been washed. So many times it forgot what color it started as. A dress from a department store rack, hemmed slightly too long, with flat shoes that had a scuff mark on the left toe she'd covered with a black marker, and mostly succeeded. No jewelry, no designer label. Nothing that would tell you, even for a second, who her father was. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. The Whitmore estate sat on a hill, above the Connecticut coastline, like it had been placed there by someone who wanted to make a statement, and had the budget to make it permanent. White stone, tall windows, iron gates that opened slowly. The kind of slowly that made you feel the weight of what you were walking into before you'd taken a single step inside. The driveway alone was longer than most city blocks. Nora had driven it twice a month for 2 years. She never felt smaller at the end of it. That was the thing about Nora. Spaces didn't diminish her. They just revealed whether she belonged in them. And belonging, in her experience, had very little to do with the square footage. Inside, 200 guests drifted through the ballroom. Silk, diamonds, champagne flutes held at exactly the right height. The kind of party where everyone is performing being at a party, where the conversations are loud enough to be noticed, and enough to suggest discretion, which is its own kind of performance. A string quartet played in the corner. Nobody listened, but everyone was glad it was there. Nora walked in, and the room did what rooms like this always do when someone wearing gray arrives. A slight pause, a collective recalibration. The way a symphony orchestra briefly loses its thread when something unexpected enters the acoustic space. She didn't flinch. She never flinched. She took a glass of water from a passing tray. Not champagne, water. And she stood near the tall windows facing the long driveway, and she watched. This was something Nora Caldwell was very, very good at, watching. Near the entrance, a young server was carrying a tray of crystal champagne flutes. He was maybe 22, maybe 23, the kind of young that makes everything feel slightly too big, including the uniform he was wearing, which was just a half-inch too wide at the shoulders, and had clearly been sized for someone else. He hit the edge of a step he hadn't seen coming. The tray lurched. Crystal teetered at an angle that made 3 nearby guests actually inhale. Nora was closer than any of them. She moved without thinking. One hand under the tray, the other steadying his wrists. The glasses settled. Not one touched the floor. The young man looked at her like she had just pulled him the path of something moving fast. Hey, she kept her voice low, private, just for him in a room of 200 people. You've got it. Breathe first, then walk. He exhaled, like the word breathe had physically unlocked something in his chest that had been wound too tight. Thank you, he whispered. She was already moving. She didn't look back, not because she didn't care, but because looking back would have made it into something. And she hadn't done it to make it into something. She'd done it because the glasses were falling, and she was close enough to catch them. That was all. At the coat check, a woman in her mid-50s was working the counter, with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been underestimated at their job. So many times they've stopped being surprised by it, and started being good at it anyway. Her name tag said Ruth. Ruth had been working coat check at Whitmore events for 9 years. In 9 years, she had been invisible to approximately 97% of the guests who passed through. She had learned to be efficient, to smile at the right angle, to make change quickly and stay out of the way. Ruth. Nora handed over her coat. How's your mother doing? Elliot mentioned the surgery was last month. Ruth looked up. Actually looked up. People don't do that. Not here. Not people who arrive at events like this one, in cars with drivers, wearing things that cost more than Ruth's monthly rent. They hand over their coats and look at their phones and say thanks without making eye contact. She's doing much better, actually. Ruth's voice came out softer than she intended. The hip replacement went well. She's already walking with a cane. That's such good news. Nora meant it, you could tell. There was a quality to her attention that didn't perform interest. It just was interested. She'll be back to her garden by spring. That's exactly what she keeps saying. Give her my best when you talk to her. She tipped Ruth before taking her claim ticket. More than any guest would tip all night. Ruth watched her walk into the ballroom and felt something she would later struggle to put into words. Something about how certain to make you feel seen without making it a moment. Without making you feel like you owe them something for the noticing. She just felt seen. That was it. That was the whole thing. Nora moved through the ballroom the way water moves through a room. Not loudly, not forcefully. Just finding the path of least resistance and following it with complete calm. Stopping here, listening there, smiling at something someone said, near the bar, that was genuinely funny, rather than the kind of funny you perform at parties. She picked up a second glass of water, still not champagne. She stood near the fireplace for a few minutes and listened to a conversation between two women about a renovation project. She added something small and specific about a contractor in the area that one of the women wrote down on her phone. Then she moved on. She didn't need them to remember her name. She wasn't building anything in this room. She was just in it. Near the far end of the ballroom, a cluster of men had gathered in the configuration of people who want to appear casual and are not casual at all. Shoulders angled inward, voices drop just below the string quartet. Nora slowed her pace, not obviously, just enough. One bad quarter from the edge. Everyone in this room knows it, even if nobody's saying it. Caldwell contract is the only thing keeping us vertical right now. If the chairman decides not to renew, he'll renew. He's been a partner for 6 years. He hasn't. A pause. The pause that carries weight. He hasn't signed yet. Nora took a sip of water. She heard the word Caldwell and felt something move through her chest. Not surprise. Not the particular satisfaction of being right. Something quieter than both of those things. Something closer to the feeling you get when you read the last page of a book you already knew the ending of. Recognition. She set her water glass down, kept walking, didn't say a word. She found Elliot near the center of the room. He found her at the same time, which was how it always worked between them. Like they were each navigating by the same internal compass, calibrated to the same fixed point. He was wearing a suit that fit the way his father's suits never quite fit him. Deliberately, specifically, like he'd chosen it to say something without saying it out loud. His jaw was tight in the way it got tight in this house. Off this room, around these people. You okay? He asked immediately. Not hello, not you look beautiful, just you okay. That was Elliot Whitmore at 34 years old. A man who had spent his entire childhood in a house where nobody asked that question, and had grown up determined to ask of the people who mattered to him every single chance he got. I'm fine. She squeezed his hand. It's a beautiful party. My father's already in a mood. When isn't he? Not a question. He laughed, a small, genuine sound. The laugh of a man who needed to laugh at something and had just been given the exact right opening. Stay close to me tonight, he said. I always do. Elliot Whitmore had grown up in this house the way some plants grow in rooms that don't have enough light. Technically alive, technically growing, but always angled toward whatever small warmth was available and never quite sure if it was enough or if it was going to last. Law's father built Whitmore Enterprises from one regional manufacturing contract in 1987, had grown it over 30 years through force of will, and the kind of relentlessness that doesn't always leave room for other things. Things like sitting down, things like listening, things like asking your son what he actually wanted from his life instead of telling him what it was going to be. Elliot started arguing with his father around the time he was 28. Not because he'd lost, because he'd figured out something more useful. That some arguments don't end. They just go on until someone gets tired enough to step back. And the person who steps back first isn't always the one who was wrong. He had been waiting for something. For a long time he hadn't known what. Then he'd met Nora at a charity fundraiser 2 years before the wedding, standing near the food table, eating a piece of cheese off a paper napkin like she was at a backyard cookout rather than a black tie event. And she had looked at him with those calm, dark eyes, and something had settled in his chest that had been unsettled for as long as he could remember. He hadn't told her who his father was. Not for 2 months. She hadn't told him who her father was. Not for 6. They had laughed about that later, separately deciding to be seen as themselves first, discovering, when they finally compared notes, that they had made the same bet for the same reasons. It had felt like finding out someone dreamed in the same language you did. Garrison Whitmore was 68 years old. He had the posture of a man who had decided somewhere around 45 owed him its full attention and had been collecting on that debt with interest ever since. Silverware jaw. The particular tan of a man who golfs not for pleasure, but to be seen golfing with the right people. He was holding court near the fireplace, which was where Garrison always was at events like this. Near the warmth, near the light. In the place where the room came to him rather than the other way around. He saw Nora at approximately the same moment she passed through the far doorway, and his face did the thing it always did when it saw her. It went flat. Not angry, not yet. Flat. The expression of a man who has already filed something under a category and doesn't feel the need to revisit the filing. She was in the category called mistake. Had been since the evening Elliot brought her home for the first time. And she'd arrived with sunflowers from a farmer's market and a bottle of wine she'd chosen herself. And Garrison had looked at both and understood, immediately and completely in his own estimation, exactly what he was dealing with. A woman without resources trying to acquire them. He had been certain of this for 2 years. He had never once questioned the certainty. That was Garrison Whitmore's defining quality, if you were being honest about it. Not his success. Not his drive. Not even the relentlessness that had taken one contract in 1987 and turned it into an empire. His defining quality was the absolute unshakable confidence that what he had already decided was the truth. He watched Nora cross the room toward his son, and he made a decision. Tonight was the night. Sylvia Whitmore was 65 and had once been, by any standard measure, extraordinarily beautiful. She still was, in the precise and slightly terrifying way of women who have converted beauty from a gift into a discipline. Every gesture calibrated, every expression a choice. The emerald silk she was wearing had been selected 6 weeks in advance for this specific evening. She moved through the party the way weather moves, purposefully, without needing to ask anything's permission. She drifted past Nora near the edge of the room, did not stop. "What a brave little dress," she murmured, and kept walking. Before Nora could answer, before anyone nearby could determine with absolute certainty whether it had been a compliment or a cut, which was exactly how Sylvia Whitmore had always preferred her cruelties. On the register of plausible deniability, 2 women nearby hid their smiles behind their champagne flutes. Elliot's jaw tightened. Nora touched his arm, a light specific pressure. "Don't. Not here." She had learned, over 2 years of Sunday dinners and holiday visits, and the particular kind of inspection that disguised itself as a family gathering, that responding to Sylvia Whitmore was like arguing with weather. You could be right. You could be completely verifiably right. And the weather would still do whatever it was going to do. It was better to have a good coat. 3 years before this evening, Nora stood in the doorway of an apartment in the kind of a neighborhood where the coffee shops hadn't been renovated yet, and the laundromat on the corner had been there since 1974 and still had the original sign. She had 3 boxes, a mattress, and an IKEA bookshelf that had not survived the move with all its structural integrity intact. Warren Caldwell stood in the hallway behind her. He was 69 years old now. He'd been 66 then, and he'd looked at his daughter, surrounded by cardboard and flat-pack furniture in various states of assembly. And he had not offered to fix any of it, had not offered to hire someone to fix it, had not suggested a different apartment in a different building in a different neighborhood. He had stood in the doorway with hands in his coat pockets and watched her figure out which box had the tools in it. That was how Warren loved his daughter, quietly, from a position where he could catch her if she fell, but far enough back that she wouldn't stop trying. When the Buckwell was upright with a philosophical relationship to the concept of vertical, Nora turned to him, hands on her hips, slightly out of breath. Satisfied in the way you're satisfied when you've done something with your hands. Okay, she said. You can go. I know. He didn't move. You understand why we're doing this. Not a question. He never made questions when they were actually statements. Because I need people to see me before they see the name, she said. Yes, and if they can't do that, then you'll know something important about them, he said. Before it costs you more than it needs to. She looked at him. He looked back. The specific look of two people who trust each other completely and have never needed to say so, because the trust has been demonstrated in action for 30 years and is no longer a thing that requires words. Okay, she said again. He left. He drove 40 minutes back to the house he'd lived in since she was 6 years old. Made himself coffee in the kitchen. Sat at the table, where they'd had approximately 10,000 conversations over the years. And he looked at the chair across from him. The one that still had a scratch on the leg from the time Noah had dragged it across the floor when she was 9. And very impatient about something. He looked at that chair for a long time. Then he drank his coffee and trusted his daughter. Back in the ballroom, the evening had found its rhythm. The quartet had settled into something familiar. Conversations had organized themselves into their natural configurations. People who wanted to be seen with certain people had arranged themselves next to those people. People who needed to talk business in a social setting had found their corners. And Garrison Whitmore had started moving. Nora saw it before Elliot did. The slight shift in posture, the deliberate way he handed his glass to a passing server without looking, the way the crowd parted for him, the way crowds part for men who have never had to ask. She tracked it the way you track weather, without alarm. Just awareness. Elliot, she said quietly. He turned, saw his father's trajectory. Something moved through his face. Old tired. The expression of a man who has seen this particular before and knows it doesn't end easily. I'm here, she said. I know. His hand found the small of her back. I know. Garrison Whitmore stopped in the center of the room. Not near her, not beside her, in front of her. The geometry of it was deliberate. One is proximity. The other is a statement. And Garrison had always communicated in statements. You, not her name. Just you. Loud enough to turn heads within a 12-foot radius. I'd like a word. The string quartet kept playing. Slightly quieter now, as if they'd received a memo about the shift in the room's atmosphere. Conversations dropped to murmurs, then to silence. Nora set her water glass down on the nearest surface, folded her hands in front of her, looked at him with those calm, dark eyes. Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Don't Mr. Whitmore me as if we're friends. He swirled the glass a server had just placed in his hand. You've been part of this family for 2 years. 2 years. And in all that time, a single verifiable thing about where you came from or who your people are. I've never hidden anything, sir. No. He smiled, the smile of a man who has made up his mind and is enjoying saying it out loud. Then where's your family? Where are the people who should be standing beside you at an event like this one? Where's the money? Where's the name that explains why you're wearing my family's name? My family couldn't come tonight. How convenient. He said those 2 words like they were evidence, like they completed an argument he'd been building for 24 months. Someone drifted closer to the edge of the conversation. Then someone else. And someone else. The way people drift toward accidents on the highway. The way they slow down. Not because they mean to look, but because something in them responds to crisis before the conscious mind catches up. Garrison felt them gathering. His voice expanded to fill the space they created. Let me tell you what I see, he said. I see a woman with no family worth mentioning, no money worth discussing, no history that anyone with the right tools could find. He looked at her steadily. I see someone who looked at my son and made a calculation. That isn't true. I see someone very good at appearing to be something she isn't. Dad, Elliot stepped forward. Stop. I stay out of this. She's my wife. She's a liability. Garrison's voice dropped into something almost conversational. And liabilities get corrected. That's business. That's just how this works. The word corrected landed in the room, the way a heavy object lands on a hard floor. Everyone heard it, and everyone understood it. Nora didn't flinch, but her hands tightened, just slightly, in front of her. Not visible to most people in the room, but Elliot saw it, and his hand found hers immediately. Warm, firm. "I'm here." Garrison watched their joined hands, and something moved through his expression. Not softening, precisely the opposite. The look of a man watching something he'd been trying to prevent, and finding it in the process of happening anyway. He turned back to Nora, slow, deliberate, the pace of someone who is not in a hurry because they believe they've already won. "I had you looked into," he said. Nora's eyes lifted directly. "You did what? What?" "I think you heard me." He set his glass on the nearest surface. "I hired someone. Quiet, discreet, thorough, the best. Because I needed to know exactly what had walked into this family." He spread his hands, open, like a man presenting evidence, not that he knows it. He tilted his head slightly. "I spent 12 months, a full year, and he came back with essentially nothing of substance." "Your investigator wasn't very thorough," Nora said. Her voice was even, completely even. The voice of someone who has heard worse and stood through worse and is standing through this. "My investigator," Garrison said. And now the performance quality of his voice increased slightly. The way a performer's voice increases when the audience has grown to a satisfying size is the best money can buy. And money, as I suspect you understand extremely well, is something your kind has always been very interested in getting closer to. The crowd had grown. 40 people within earshot. 50. Phones had begun to appear, held low, at thigh level. Red recording lights blinking in the candlelight like small, quiet eyes taking everything in. A Garrison saw them, and didn't care he had wanted witnesses. Tonight he finally had them. Nora felt the heat climb the back of her neck. Not anger, or not only anger. Something older and heavier than anger, the particular weariness that settles into the bones of someone who has been patient for a very long time. Who has shown up, who has tried, who has sat at tables and asked questions and remembered an answer, and done every single thing that should, in any reasonable version of the world, constitute effort and good faith, and has been told repeatedly in various configurations of the same message that none of it counted. Because the decision about what she was had been made before any of it happened. She breathed through it, the way she'd learned to breathe through it. Slowly, from the bottom. "I didn't marry Elliot for your money," she said. "I have never asked this family for a single thing. Not money, not resources, not introductions, not access. Not one thing, easy words, they're true. They're the words someone would say who knows exactly how they should sound." "Or," Nora said, and her voice stayed even, "they're the words of someone who is telling you the truth." Garrison looked at her for a long moment, the look of a man encountering an argument he doesn't have a counter to, and choosing not to acknowledge that. I turned to the room instead, because the room was there, because the room was watching, because Garrison Whitmore had spent 40 years learning that the best way to win an argument was to make it public before the other person was ready. "You see," he said to the crowd, in the tone of a man making a reasonable observation rather than a devastating one. "No anger, no defense, no fight." He looked back at Nora, but because she knows what I know. Sly, he let the pause do its work. "You're not fit to wear this family's name." Somewhere to his left, Sylvia laughed, small, silver, precisely calibrated. A few nearby guests joined in, thin, nervous sounds. The sounds of people who want to be on the right side of something, and are still calculating which side that is. Elliot had gone very still, the kind of still that precedes something, the way the air goes still before weather. Apologized to her. His voice was quiet. Somehow made it worse than if he'd shouted, right now, in front of all of these people. Garrison looked genuinely surprised. "Apologize?" I said it the way you'd say an unfamiliar word in a foreign language, like he was trying on the sound of it. "She has done nothing to this family except show up. Every time, for 2 years. Elliot's voice stayed controlled but barely. "She knows Ruth's name at the coat check, and she asked about her mother's surgery, and she has sat at your table for 2 years, being talked at like she's evidence of something, and she has never once since, not once, raised her voice in this house." He looked at his father. "Can you say the same?" "Garrison, say this once," he said. The performance dropped out of his voice, something colder underneath, "and I want every person in this room to hear it." He looked at Elliot directly. You have a choice tonight, in front of all of these people. Her, or this family. Her or your name. Her or every single thing I have built over 40 years. He paused, let it sit, because the moment you choose that woman over this family, you are no longer a Whitmore. No inheritance, no company, no position, no seat at any table I have ever built or will ever build. You will have nothing. He looked at Nora, then back at his son. Accept her, and we both know what that's worth. 200 people. Not one of them moved. Nora turned to look at that. She didn't tell him what to choose, didn't squeeze his hand, didn't make a gesture that could be interpreted as pressure in either direction. She just looked at him. With those calm, dark eyes. The same eyes that had looked at him across a food table 2 years ago, and made something settle in him that had been unsettled his entire life. Whatever you decide, she said, quietly, just for him. I'll understand, I mean every word of that. Elliot looked at his father, at the silver-haired guests arranged around them like an audience at a verdict, at the phones, at Garrison Whitmore, 68 years old, who had built an empire and raised a son, and managed to arrive at this moment in a room full of people who are all watching to see what the son would do. Then he looked at Nora, at the woman who had caught a falling tray without being asked, who had known Ruth's name and asked about her mother, who had spent 2 years in rooms like this one and never once, not once, asked him to make it easier or fight back or choose. She had just kept being herself, every time, in every room, steady as something planted deep. I don't need a second, Elliot said. Garrison's smile widened, certain, already savoring, I choose her. Elliot's voice was steady in the way something is steady when it comes from the right place, from somewhere below the chest, from somewhere that has been decided for a long time and is only now being said out loud. I will always choose her. Every room, every time. The smile froze on Garrison Whitmore's face, froze solid and cracked. A gasp moved through the crowd, fast and electric. The sound of 200 people who were not expecting to be surprised. Sylvia's champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips. For one full heartbeat, Garrison simply stared at his son, like a man waiting for a correction. Like he had simply misheard the words and the right words were coming. They weren't coming. Then his face went dark red. The red starting at his collar, climbing, then get out. The words came out trembling with the specific fury of a man who has been publicly defeated by the one person he thought he had complete power over. Both of you, out of my house, out of this family. You are dead to me, Elliot. You hear me? Dead. As of this moment, Nora took her husband's hand. She did not argue. She did not say a single word. She just lowered her eyes slightly, the way she always did when cruelty got loud, the way she always did when the room got small, and she turned. But she didn't move toward the front door. She moved toward the windows, the tall windows facing the long driveway, where a pair of headlights had just swung through the iron gate. Garrison saw her move and misread it completely. Did you not hear me? He stepped toward her, the wine trembling in his glass. I said get out through the door, like a guest leaves, not through my windows. I'm waiting for someone, Nora said, softly. You're waiting for nothing. You have nothing. He stepped closer still, close enough that his voice went quiet with the particular intimacy of a threat delivered at close range. Walk out right now before I have you removed. And that was when Sylvia screamed, small, theatrical, one hand flying to her bare wrist. My bracelet. Her voice climbed the register. It's gone. My grandmother's diamonds. They were right here, right on my wrist, and now. She looked at her bare wrist, then at the room, and then her eyes landed on Nora like a trap snapping shut on something. She was standing next to me. Not 20 minutes ago, she touched my arm. I felt it. I never touched you, Nora said. Calm, which only made it worse. Liar. The word came out fast. Certain. The word of a woman who had already decided it and was now gathering the room to her side. She turned to the crowd, performing now. Both of them performing now. Mother and father, the same production from different angles. I knew it. The moment she walked in, I knew it. You let people like this into your home. And this is what happens. This is exactly what happens. Garrison's face lit something ugly, satisfied. The expression of a man who has been given the thing he needed, not just a poor woman to mock, a crime to prosecute. Cole. He raised his voice toward the shadows near the wall. A large man in a dark suit stepped forward. Raymond Cole, head of security for the Whitmore estate, who went by Reeves because nobody had called him Raymond since his mother died. Flat, careful eyes. The expression of a man who is very good at following orders and has spent years finding ways to not think too hard about which orders were right and which ones weren't. Sir, this woman has stolen from my wife. Garrison's voice was even, cold, the voice of a man making a reasonable request, not a cruelty. Search her bag. Right now. Reeves's eyes moved to Nora. She looked back at him. He hesitated. 1 second, just one. Sir, protocol requires first that I don't care about protocols. I care about my bracelet, and I care about getting it back from the person who took it. Bag. Open it. Nora felt that the weight of 200 pairs of eyes settling on her like something physical, something with mass. The specific sensation of being seen not as a person but as a category, as a suspect, as the kind of thing that happens when you let the wrong sort of person into your home. She had been here before. Not this room, not this marble floor, not this particular configuration of silk and diamonds arranged in a circle around her, like a jury that had already voted. But this moment, this specific moment. The hand reaching for your things because someone more power has decided you are the kind of person whose things can be reached for. The assumption that lands before any evidence has been considered. The conclusion that forms from the shape of you rather than anything you've done. She knew this feeling, and she had never, not once in her 32 years, gotten used to it. She looked at Reeves. You don't have to do this, she told him quietly. She doesn't make that determination, Garrison said. Bag. Nora's jaw tightened, and something moved behind her eyes, something that had been very carefully contained all evening. Not fear. Something older and more tired than fear. The tiredness of a woman who has been patient for a very long time, and is still being patient, and is starting to feel the weight of that patience in her bones. She held out the clutch. Reeves took it, gently, almost up all its front of everyone, in the middle of the room. In the brightest part of the candlelight, turned it over, a phone, a folded tissue, a tube of lip balm, a house key, a single stick of gum still in the wrapper. He shook it once, twice, nothing. The silence changed shape. Check again, Sylvia said. He checked again, ran a thumb along the lining, held the clutch upside down and shook it harder, still nothing. There's nothing here, Mrs. Whitmore. Reeves's voice was careful, specifically careful. The voice of a man choosing his words with the awareness that this room contains 100 phones. There is nothing in this bag. Then she hid it somewhere else. Check her. Elliot's voice came out in a way it had not come out all evening. Not quiet, not controlled, done. He lunged forward, and a second guard caught him by the shoulders, both hands holding him back. He strained against the grip, jaw clenched, eyes on his father. Get your hands off her things. She didn't take anything. She has never taken anything from this family. Hold him, Garrison said. Flat, cold. Dad, hold. The guard's grip tight. Elliot couldn't break free. He strained and couldn't, and the effort of it, the physical effort of a man trying to reach his wife and being held back in his own father's house, was the thing that made several people in the room look away. Not at shame for Nora. Shame for themselves. For being here. For watching, for the phones they'd raised and the smiles they'd hidden behind champagne flutes. Nora caught Elliot's eyes, gave the smallest shake of her head. Not yet. Wait. She stood very still. In the center of the room, 200 people watching, phones recording. Her husband held back by a guard, her clutch in another guard's hands, empty as it had been when she walked in. And the host of the party staring at her with open contempt, daring her to cry and her to break, daring her to prove, in some visible way, that he'd been right about her all along. She looked at him steady, no flicker. Sir, she said, and her voice carried clean and clear across the entire room, through the murmurs, through the sound of champagne being set down on trays, through the muted music, through the breathing of 200 people who had stopped pretending to be somewhere else. Your wife's bracelet is on the side table next to the fireplace. She set it down when she adjusted her earring. I watched her do it. Approximately 1 hour ago. Every head in the room turned toward the fireplace. There, on the small marble side table, sitting in the candlelight like it had always been there. Because it had. A circle of diamonds, catching the light. Throwing it back up across the ceiling in small scattered points of brightness. A footman crossed the room with the specific efficiency of someone who wants this to be over. He lifted the bracelet, held it up for the room to see. A call. It caught the light, and the room exhaled. Not with relief, with something more complicated than relief. The particular sound of 200 people simultaneously arriving at a realization about what they just participated in, about what they had just watched, about the phones they had held at thigh level, and the smiles they had hidden, and the way they had drifted toward the wreckage, because something in them responded to it. One older woman near the bar set down her champagne glass, reached for her coat, said something quiet to the man beside her. He reached for his coat too. A ripple moved through the room, not loud, not dramatic. The quiet shift of people deciding where they did not want to be filmed standing. Garrison looked at the bracelet, at Nora, at the bracelet again. That proves nothing, he said. His voice had lost something. Not the conviction, something underneath the conviction. The certainty. The absolute bedrock certainty that had powered every word he'd said tonight. It wasn't gone, but it had cracked just enough. She could have planned to take it later, he said. People like Thor always have a contingency, always have an angle working. People like her. Elliot's voice came out from somewhere very controlled, very deliberate. The voice of a man spending the last of his patience on precision rather than volume.
Say it plainer, Dad. Say what you actually mean.
I mean exactly what I say. Then say it exactly, out loud, in this, and with all of these people listening. Garrison's jaw set. He turned from his son, back to Nora. He stepped close, very close, close enough that his voice dropped into something almost private, almost gentle. And somehow that was worse than all of it. Somehow the gentleness was the cruelest thing. You picked the wrong house to walk into, he said quietly. And I am going to make certain you leave it with nothing. No husband, no name, nothing that carries the Whitmore Association. I will bury you in legal proceedings until you can't remember what you thought you were going to get from this family. He looked at her directly. Do you understand me? Nora looked back at him. For a long moment, she was not shaking. She was not crying. She was just looking at him. The way you look at something you have been trying to understand it for a very long time and have finally completely understood. No, Mr. Whitmore, she said. Her voice was steady, quiet, and it carried somehow across the whole room. You picked the wrong woman to humiliate. Something crossed his face.
There and gone.
Like a draft across a candle flame, just enough to bend the light before it straightened again. He laughed, short, dismissive. The laugh of a man who has decided he is still winning. A threat? From you? He shook his head. You don't have the power.
Oh, Nora said.
Garrison blinked. Then what exactly do you need? She looked past him, toward the tall windows, toward the long driveway where the headlights had slowed to a stop. I just need to wait, she said. And outside, a car door shut, firm, unhurried. The sound of it carried through the tall windows and into the silent ballroom. And in the silence, it was very loud. Garrison didn't hear it. He was still running the scene, still in the version of this evening he had written in his head months ago. Still the hero of the story he told himself about himself. A man protecting his family's legacy from someone who didn't belong in it. He was still very certain of this. Reeves now heard it. His earpiece crackled. He touched it with 2 fingers, pressed, listened. His face changed, not subtly, completely. The flat, careful expression of a man who follows orders gave way to something else. Something that looked a great deal like the specific fear of someone who has just followed an order in front of 200 cameras. And is now getting information that makes that decision look like a much larger problem than it was 30 seconds ago. Sir, soft, he stepped toward Garrison. Garrison didn't look away from Nora. Sir, louder, what could possibly? There's the man at the steps. He's here for Mrs. Whitmore. Garrison exhaled through his nose, impatient at already composing the dismissal. Then throw him out with her, whoever he, sir. And now Reeves's voice had something in it that made the sentence stop. The specific quality of someone who is choosing their next words with extreme care. I think you need to see this for yourself.
The tall front door swung open. Cold November air rolled into the ballroom. It moved through the nearest candles, bending them sideways, and they straightened slowly, one by one, like something recovering its composure.
The string quartet, which had not resumed playing since Garrison first raised his voice, stayed silent. 100 guests turned toward the entrance, as one. A man stepped through the doorway. He was older, perhaps 72, dressed in a plain dark overcoat, no tie, no pocket square, no jewelry. Nothing that would tell you at first glance that he was anyone in particular. Nothing that would tell you he was anyone at all. He moved without hurry, the way a man moves when he has simply never need to rush, because the rooms have always waited for him, not because he demanded it, but because of something in the quality of his presence that made rooms understand without being told that waiting was appropriate. His eyes swept the room, the guards, the empty clutch still in Reeves's hands. Elliot no longer restrained but standing rigid with something barely controlled, of the bracelet in the footman's grip, the 200 phones, the candles, the string quartet sitting with their instruments in their laps, not playing, and his daughter, standing alone in the center of the marble floor.
Chin up, the eye steady. Not broken, not even close. His face, until that moment entirely composed, went very still, then very cold.
He didn't look angry, exactly. He looked like a man reading the last page of a book he had hoped to be wrong about and was not wrong about. He crossed the room, not running, not striding, just walking with the particular certainty of someone who has decided where they're going and sees no obstacle between here and there. He came to where Nora was standing. He rested one hand on her shoulder. Light, steady, like something placed rather than landed. And she let out a breath she had been holding for 3 hours. Her shoulders settled. Something in her face changed. Not much, just enough. The specific change of a person who has been holding something alone for a very long time and has just been joined. Garrison looked at the man in the plain coat and saw exactly what he expected to see. A nobody. An older man in unremarkable clothing, with no entourage and no announcement, and nothing about him that required any special attention. Garrison Whitmore had spent 40 years building the ability to assess people in under 10 seconds. He assessed this man, filed him, and was wrong about everything. And who, he said, with the full assembled weight of his contempt, is this supposed to be? The man said nothing yet. He looked at the room, at all of it, quietly, completely, the way a man looks at something he already understands and is simply confirming. And then Sylvia Whitmore made the last mistake of a very long evening. She saw the coat, plain, dark. She saw the age. She saw the absence of hats, the absence of anything announcing and emanates itself. And her brain did what her brain had always done in rooms like this one. It filled in the blank. She stepped into his path with her wine glass raised slightly, using it like a barrier, using it the way she used everything, as an instrument. The staff entrance, she said, with the specific warmth of a woman who considers herself patient with people that deal with her, is around the back of the property. You simply can't come through the front of the house as if you. She flicked her wrist. The red wine arsed through the air. It caught the candlelight for one long, suspended second, beautiful almost in its terrible way. Then it soaked down the front of his coat in a dark, spreading wave. The room gasped. One sound from 200 mouths. The man stopped. He looked down at the stain spreading slowly across his chest. Then he looked up at Sylvia Whitmore, and he smiled. It was not an angry smile. It was not a wounded smile. It was something else entirely. The calm, patient smile of a man who has just been handed the last piece of evidence he needed, who came into this room wondering what kind of people the Whitmores were when they thought no one important was watching. And now, thank you, he said quietly. Sylvia blinked. What? That's very helpful. He pulled a handkerchief from his coat pocket, pressed it once to the stain, folded it precisely, returned it to his pocket, as though the whole thing was simply a minor administrative matter, already handled, already filed away. The whole time his eyes moved through the room, watching, counting, remembering faces. And that was when Aldous Finch went white. Aldous had been standing near the bar, phone in hand, scrolling through something. The specific behavior of a CFO at a social event, present indeed, never quite off the clock. He had been looking at the Caldwell contract on his phone. Because he was always looking at the Caldwell contract. Because it had been keeping him up at night for 6 months. Because the renewal hadn't been signed, and nobody at Whitmore Enterprises wanted to talk about what happened if it didn't get signed. And Aldous was the person whose job it was to know what happened. And the answer was not something he enjoyed knowing. He looked up from his phone, at the man in the wine-stained coat. He looked back at his phone, at the small profile photograph next to the company name at the top of the contract. He looked up again. He took off his glasses, put them back on, as though he did not trust what his own eyes were showing him. The glass in his hand went very, very still. "Oh God," he whispered, so quietly that almost nobody heard it. But the two people nearest him heard it, and they turned. And they looked at Aldous Finch, who was the most financially capable man in the building, standing with all the color drained out of his face like water leaving a cracked vessel. Garrison turned. Aldous, what is it? But Aldous wasn't looking at Garrison. He was looking at the man in the wine-stained coat. He took one step forward, then stopped.
Mr. Caldwell, he said. His voice cracked on the name, right down the center. Warren Caldwell, he said it, louder,
because the room needed to hear it. Sir, I had absolutely no idea you were coming tonight. If we had known, we would have. You weren't meant to know, Warren said. His voice was quiet, even. The voice of a man who has been in many rooms and has learned that the rooms that reveal the most are the ones where no one has prepared a performance for you. I wanted to see this family, he said, the way they are when they believe no one important is watching. Garrison's smile flickered, a small involuntary failure of control. Caldwell? He turned to Aldous. Who is? Aldous, what are you talking about? Aldous turned to his boss. He looked like a man watching a building collapse from the inside, floor by floor. Garrison. He said the name carefully. The way you say a name when you need the person to hear it clearly, and stay calm. And you know they are not going to stay calm. That is Warren Caldwell, founder and chairman of Caldwell Industries. He's on his contract. The $1.8 billion contract that is the primary reason this company is still solvent. He held Garrison's gaze. He owns it. He's owned it for 6 years. A pause. One more breath. And he is Nora's father. The words moved through the ballroom. Fast, electric. The way information moves through a room, when it changes everything about what everyone in the room has just witnessed. The senator who had laughed too loudly an hour ago found something very interesting to examine near the floor. 3 people near the back put their phones fully in the air. No more thigh level. No more discretion. Garrison's face had gone slack. That's impossible. I came in a plain coat. There's no... He doesn't need any of it, Aldous said. Quiet, like a man delivering a verdict. He never has. Warren Caldwell turned his full attention to Garrison Whitmore, and the temperature in the room seemed to shift. Not dramatically, but measurably. You're right, Warren said. I came quietly. Old coat. No announcement. No security. He looked at Garrison with the calm, clear gaze of a man who has made his decisions and is at peace with all of them. I wanted to know what kind of man my daughter had married into. The kind of man she'd been sitting across from at Sunday dinners for 2 years. He paused. I wanted to see it for myself. He let that land, and I heard it all. I said, the driveway, the windows were open. Garrison's lips moved. You. Every word, Warren said simply. And Garrison Whitmore, who had built an empire on certainty, who had spent 68 years being the most certain person in every room, stood in the brightest part of his own ballroom. And for the first time in a very long time, he had nothing to say. Warren's hand was still resting on Nora's shoulder, light, steady, and she looked at her father, and he looked at her, and she said quietly, in a voice that only the people very close to her could hear, Hi, Dad. 2 words. That changed everything. That had always been going to change everything. From the moment Warren Caldwell drove 40 minutes up the Connecticut coast 3 days ago, and took a room and waited, just in case, just to be geographically available. Just to be close enough to catch her if she fell. These 2 words were always coming. She just hadn't needed them until now. Garrison reached behind him. His hand found the back of a chair, his fingers wrapped around it, knuckles white. He had wanted witnesses. He had gotten the whole country. He just hadn't known it yet, but he was beginning to understand. Here is what nobody tells you about public humiliation. It has a weight, not a metaphorical weight, an actual, physical, measurable weight. The kind you feel in your shoulders, in the back of your neck, in the specific tension that builds along your jaw when you have been holding your face in one expression for 3 hours because the alternative is letting 200 people see what's underneath it. Nora knew that weight, had known it for 2 years, just never quite this concentrated, never quite this public, and never until this moment with her father's hand on her shoulder, and the truth sitting in the center of the room like a stone and stone someone had finally put down after carrying it a very long way. The ballroom had not recovered. Rooms like this one, rooms built for performance, for the careful management of impression, for the specific social theater of people with money demonstrating to each other that they have money. Rooms like this one do not recover quickly from moments of genuine truth. They go quiet in a different way. Not the polite quiet of a room waiting for the next thing to happen. The heavy quiet of a room that has just watched something it cannot unsee. That has been pulled against its will out of performance and into reality, and is not entirely sure what to do with the difference. 200 guests. Not one of them moving. Garrison was back on his feet. Technically, he had pulled himself upright using the chair, then the edge of a nearby table, then the sheer structural force of pride that had gotten him into this situation in the first place. He was standing. He was technically composed, but his face had the specific look of a man who has just arrived at the last page of a story he thought he was writing, and discovered that someone else had been writing it all along. Sylvia stood 6 feet away from him, not beside him, 6 feet, the distance of a woman doing rapid private recalculation. Aldous Finch had not moved from his position near the bar. He was holding his phone in both hands now, looking at it, looking at Warren, looking back at it, running numbers in his head that he did not want to be running, adding things up and not enjoying the sum. And Warren Caldwell stood in the center of all of it, unhurried. The wine stain on his coat had gone dark, the way stains go when they've been there long enough to stop being an accident and become something else. Record. The specific kind of mark that doesn't wash out easily. Elliot had crossed to Nora the moment Reeves released his grip. Not running, walking fast. The walk of a man who has one destination and has stopped pretending otherwise. He pulled her into him, both arms, his chin against the top of her head, and he held her the way you hold someone when you need them to understand, without words, that the holding is not about comfort so much as it is about presence. About saying, I am here. I was always here. I chose here. I'm sorry. His voice was low, just for her. The rest of the room didn't exist. For all of it, for tonight, for 2 years of Sunday dinners, and every comment I didn't stop, and every time I thought if I just kept the peace it would eventually get better. Nora closed her eyes. 3 seconds. Exactly 3. Then she opened them. You chose me, she said, in front of all of them, when you thought it was going to cost you everything. She pulled back just enough to look at him. That's the only thing I needed you to do. That's not enough, Elliot. Her voice was steady and warm and certain. It was enough. He searched her face. The way he always searched her face, looking for the thing underneath the words, the thing she might be softening for his benefit. She always meant exactly what she said. That was one of the first things he'd understood about her, standing at that food table 2 years ago with a piece of cheese on a paper napkin. She didn't say things for effect, didn't soften things to be kind and then resent the softening later. She said what was. And this was true. He held her tighter, just for a moment, just long enough. Warren watched them, said nothing. The way a man watches his thing carefully, from a distance over a long time, watching the thing he built hold under pressure, finding in the holding the confirmation he hadn't known he needed. Then he turned back to the room. Because the room was not finished, Garrison had found his voice, which was never in any situation a simple development. Warren. He stepped forward, one hand extended, the gesture of a man attempting to convert a catastrophe into a negotiation, or at minimum to private it, get the walls of a different room around it, before more damage accumulated. I think we should speak privately. 2 reasonable men. Warren, 2 reasonable men? Not across the phrase. Repeated back in the exact tone of a man examining an object to see if it holds up. Yes, exactly whatever was said tonight. Tempers. Things can be discussed more productively when. I heard your daughter-in-law called trash. Garrison stopped. I heard her search like a criminal over a piece of jewelry that was sitting in plain sight on a table. Warren's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. The evenness of it was its own kind of force. I heard your wife suggest she'd come here with a scheme, that she'd spend years positioning herself for an inheritance. He tilted his head slightly. Was that the heat of the moment? Silence. Or is that Tuesday? Somewhere near the back of the room, someone made a sound that was almost a laugh, and then immediately wasn't. The phones were fully up now. No more thigh level, no more pretense. Just 200 people openly recording a man standing in the middle of his own ballroom being asked to account for himself. Sylvia moved. She set her empty wine glass down, the one she'd emptied onto Warren's coat, which everyone in the room was now extremely aware of, and she assembled the expression she used at charity galas. The one that said, I am a reasonable woman who has found herself in an unreasonable situation and I am handling it with grace. She moved toward Warren with both hands extended. Mr. Caldwell. Warm, practiced. A complete reversal executed with the specific skill of someone who has spent decades being whatever the room required. This is just a terrible misunderstanding. The lighting in here is genuinely terrible. I never would have. And your coat, of course I'll have it cleaned. We have a wonderful Mrs. Whitmore. Warren didn't take her hands. She stopped, hands still extended. Nowhere to put them now. You threw a full glass of wine on a man you assumed worked in your kitchen, Warren said. Not unkindly. Which was somehow more devastating than unkindly. Not because of anything I did, but because of what you decided I was, before I said a single word to you. Sylvia blinked. The charity gala expression flickered, just slightly. Well, in the moment with the lighting and And then, Warren continued, when my daughter's bag was empty, when there was absolutely nothing in it. Not the bracelet, not anything. You said, check her coat, check her person. Sylvia's hands dropped. In front of 200 people, he said. After your bracelet had already been found on the table where you'd left it. Silence. Sylvia opened her mouth, closed it. The expression was entirely gone now. Just a woman in an emerald dress standing in the rubble of the evening she had planned. The room had rearranged itself, not physically. In the invisible way rooms rearrange when the weight shifts. When the people who position themselves closest to the loudest voice start to inch quietly away from it. When the calculation of association is run in real time, and people begin the slow repositioning toward the side that the evening has made self-evident. Aldous Finch had moved, 3 feet to the left of where Garrison was standing. Then another 3. The geometry of a man creating deniable distance. He was thinking about morning, about the board, about the 14 calls he would find on his phone by 7 a, about the specific conversation that starts. We need to talk about what happened last night, and about what he was going to say. He had spent 11 years deciding what to say in hard conversations. This was going to be the hardest one. Reeves had stepped back, both hands open at his sides, the body language of a man making it visually clear, to any camera that happened to be pointed at him, that whatever had just happened, his hands were now open and empty, and he was not a party to anything going forward. He had known. From the moment Garrison said, search her bag, he had known it was wrong, not wrong as in misguided, wrong as in this is not something I can undo later, wrong as in the specific wrongness of an order that crosses a line you cannot uncross by following it. He'd said, protocol requires. He'd said, sir, I would need her consent. And Garrison had said, I don't care what you need. And Reeves had followed the order anyway. Because that was what Reeves did. That was what Reeves had always done in this house. For 13 years, because it was simpler and the alternative was consequences he hadn't wanted to face. He was facing different consequences now. He stood in the ballroom with his hands open at his sides and thought about the shape of a decision he'd made 15 minutes ago and what it was going to cost him, and thought that the cost was probably fair. The young server was at his station near the far wall, the one whose tray Nora had steadied at the beginning of the evening, the one she'd looked at and said, breathe, the one who had exhaled like she'd unlocked something he'd been watching all night, from the edge of the room, from the specific invisibility of someone in a uniform at a party like this one, watching the way this family operated, watching what they did in the light. Now he took 2 steps forward, away from the wall, away from his position, into the open space near where Nora was standing. He didn't say anything, just stood there. Then Ruth appeared in the side doorway, still holding 2 coat claim tickets. She'd heard it all. Sound traveled in a house like this, especially the kind of sounds that had been happening in the last hour. She walked in with the quiet purposefulness of a woman who has decided something and is acting on the decision without fanfare. She stood in Nora's sightline, not behind her, not beside her, where Nora could see her. A third person came from the kitchen direction, one of the catering staff, older, gray-haired. She positioned herself near the far edge of the room with her hands folded and her chin up. No announcement, no performance. Just people who had been invisible all night deciding, in the quiet way that real decisions are made, where they stood. Garrison didn't notice them. He had never once noticed them. And that, if you were paying attention, told you everything about how the evening had gotten here. You built something here. Warren's voice came out into the quiet. He looked around the room. The marble, the tall windows, the string quartet sitting with instruments in laps, the light from 200 candles. 40, he nodded, acknowledging it, making it real and visible. That's not nothing, I know what that costs. The mornings when you're not sure, the years when it could have gone the other way. I've built things too. I understand the weight of it. Garrison's chin lifted. slightly. An instinctive response to acknowledgement, like a plant moving toward light without deciding to. But you've spent so long protecting what you built, Warren said, that you stopped noticing what you were building it into. He looked at Garrison steadily. A house where a woman can be searched in front of 200 guests because someone assumed. A family where a man has to choose between his wife and his father's approval. In a room full of cameras. He paused. A name that taught your son it was worth more than the people around him. Garrison's jaw was tight. She came into this family under false pretenses. She came into this family under her own name, Warren said. Doing her own work, living in her own apartment in her own neighborhood. She kept her privacy because she wanted to be known for who she was, not who I am. He looked at Garrison. You had 2 years to see who she was. You chose not to. She let you choose. Warren's voice stayed even, completely even, the evenness of absolute conviction. How to treat a woman with no name you recognized and no money you could see. She gave you 2 years of Sunday dinners, and holidays, and events like this one. She showed you who she was every single time. He paused. And you showed her who you were every single time, too.
The room was very still. The kind of still that happens when the true thing has been said out loud in the presences of 200 people, and there is nothing left to argue with.
That's the part I keep coming back to, Warren said. Not tonight. Tonight was just the night it became visible. The way you've treated my daughter since the first evening Elliot brought her home. That wasn't heat of the moment. That was policy. That was how you operated with her every single time you were in the same room. He looked at Garrison. You were given a daughter-in-law who asked about the coat check woman's mother, who knew every server's name, who sat at your table and paid attention and never once asked you for a single thing. He let that land, and you spent 2 years trying to get rid of her. Garrison said nothing, because there was nothing to say, because Warren was right, and the room knew it, and the 100 phones recording every second of it knew it. And somewhere underneath the armor of 40 years of certainty, in a place Garrison Whitmore hadn't visited in a very long time, he knew it too. 18 months ago, the first dinner. Nora had arrived with sunflowers from the farmer's market near her apartment. She'd arranged them herself. Not beautifully. She was the first to admit she had no particular gift for flower arranging, but carefully, with the specific care of someone who had thought about the gesture and wanted it to be genuine rather than impressive. She'd also brought a bottle of wine she'd chosen, based on something Elliot had mentioned his father preferred. Sylvia had accepted the flowers with the smile she gave things she intended to put somewhere other than the dining table. How charming, she'd said. Rustic. The flowers had gone to the hallway table, in a vase that was technically too narrow for sunflowers, so they listed slightly to the left for the duration of the dinner, which Nora had noticed and said nothing about. Garrison had asked her where she'd gone to school. She'd told him. A good school. A real school. A school with a name he'd nodded at, with the nod of a man filing something under not quite good enough without being impolite about it. And your family is in. My father is in business. What kind of business? Several kinds, and he couldn't be here tonight. He had a prior commitment. Garrison had looked at her over his wine glass with the expression of a man for whom every answer she'd given had confirmed something he'd already decided. Sylvia had changed the subject to someone else entirely, and the dinner had moved on, and Nora had sat at their table and eaten their food and listened to them talk about people she didn't know and events she hadn't attended, and she had thought, okay, this is one dinner. This is just one dinner. She had called Warren on the drive home, parked outside her building with the engine running. They don't see me, she said. Warren was quiet for a moment, the specific quality of quiet that meant he was thinking rather than waiting for a turn to speak. Do they see Elliot? He asked. She thought about it. Not really, she said. Not who he actually is. Then it's not about you, Warren said. It's about what they've decided to look at. A pause. Keep going, keep being exactly who you are, every time you're in that room. That's all. She sat in the car for another 10 minutes after they hung up, watching rain hit the windshield, thinking about sunflowers in a hallway vase listing to the left. Then she went inside, made tea, and kept going. Because that was what you did. That was the whole thing. You kept going. Back in the ballroom, Garrison had rallied, or attempted to. Men like Garrison Whitmore don't stay down easily. They have too much practice at the particular skill of reframing. of taking a situation in which they are clearly, demonstrably wrong and converting it, through force of confidence and speed of narration, into a situation in which they are simply misunderstood. Warren. He stepped forward, measured. Let's be adults about this. There has to be a path forward. The contract. The contract is frozen, Warren said. That's, well, simply, I already have, Warren. And now Garrison's voice dropped into something that might, in a different room, have been mistaken for reason. For the appeal of one businessman to another, outsize the emotion of the evening. Think about what you're doing. This is not only about me. There are people whose livelihoods depend on this company. Good people, hundreds of them. People who had nothing to do with what happened tonight. Warren looked at him for a long moment. You should have thought about those people, he said, before you ordered my daughter's bag searched. I didn't know who she, Warren said, is exactly the point. He let that sit. You didn't know who she was. You thought she was nobody. You thought she had no one behind her. And that is precisely when you decided to do this. He held Garrison's gaze, not in private, not quietly, in the middle of your ballroom in front of 200 guests and 100 cameras. He paused. That tells me what I need to know. Not about tonight, about every day that came before tonight, in every room that didn't have cameras. Garrison's face worked, the machinery of justification running hard. But finding no purchase, Aldous Finch had made a decision. You could see the moment it happened, the way a man's face changes when he stops calculating and starts acting, when the math stops and the choice begins. Across the room, stopped beside Garrison. Garrison, his voice was low. The voice used in board meetings when the thing that needed to be said was the thing nobody wanted to hear. I need you to hear something. Garrison turned. I have been trying to tell you for 6 months, Aldous said, about the Caldwell contract, about our exposure, about what happens operationally if that renewal doesn't come through. He held Garrison's gaze. I sent 3 separate memos. I requested 2 meetings. I flagged it in the quarterly review. I told you it was the single largest risk on our balance sheet. He paused. You told me I was catastrophizing. Garrison stared at him. I was not catastrophizing, Aldous said. A silence. I'm going to need to make some calls tonight, Aldous said, starting with the board chair. You're not. I have fiduciary responsibility to this company and to its shareholders. Aldous said it like a man who has practiced saying it and is finally saying it. For real, tonight. He stepped back and stayed there. 6 feet, the distance of a man who has chosen his side. Harrison turned to his son. The last thing he had left to try. Elliot, his voice came out different now. The performance stripped away. Just a man, a father, which in own way was more unsettling than the performance had been, because the performance at least had structure. This was just raw. Whatever you think of me tonight, whatever was said, I'm still your father. Elliot looked at him for a long moment. I know that, he said. Then I know you're my father, Elliot said. And I know what this company cost you. I've heard the story my whole life. Every dinner, every holiday, every time you needed me to understand why things were the way they were, why you were the way you were, why certain standards had to be maintained, and certain decisions couldn't be questioned. His jaw tightened. I've heard it so many times I could tell it myself, word for word.
Garrison was very still. But you just spent 3 hours telling the woman I love that she doesn't belong in a room, Elliot said.
You had her bag searched,
in front of every person in this room,
over a bracelet that was sitting on a table the whole time. He looked at his father, and you enjoyed it. That's not. You had an audience and you enjoyed it. Not angry, just true. The specific flatness of a fact being stated. I've watched you do that my whole life. Find an audience and perform. And for my whole life I've made excuses for it, because you were my father. And I didn't have a different model for what fathers were. He paused. But I'm 34 years old, and I watched you do that to Nora tonight, and I don't have any excuses left. Garrison's face did something Garrison Whitmore's face almost never did. It looked uncertain, not about the company, not about the contract, about his son, about what he had just lost in this room that no amount of money was going to give back. Nora spoke. She hadn't spoken in several minutes, had stood beside Warren and let the room run through what it needed to run through, watching, listening, doing what she had always done in rooms like this one. But now she spoke, not loudly, into the quiet. Mr. Whitmore. Garrison looked at her. There was something different in his face when he looked at her now. Still not soft, Still not anything close to what an apology would look like. But something had shifted in it. Some layer of absolute certainty had been removed, and underneath it was something that looked less like contempt and more like exactly Sassarf. But the thing that lives next door to fear, the recognition that you have done something you cannot undo. I am not your enemy, Nora said. I never was. He said nothing. I came into this family wanting one thing, to be part of it, not the name, not what comes with the name.
The actual family, the Sunday dinners and the holidays and the history.
She held his gaze, steady, completely steady. I sat at your table for 2 years. I asked about things you cared about, and I remembered the answers. I showed up every time I was invited. I tried. She paused.
Not because of who my father is, because Elliot is my husband, and his family was supposed to become my family, and I wanted that to be real.
Garrison's jaw worked. You decided before I walked through your door what I was, she said, and nothing I did in 2 years changed it. 'Cause you weren't looking at what I did. You were looking at what you'd already decided. The room was very still. I understand why, she said, and she said it without condescension. Without the satisfaction of someone who has won and is displaying their prize. She said it the way you say something you figured out and are sharing because it's true, not because it wounds. You built everything you have from a place that scared you, and you've been afraid ever since of letting anything near it that you couldn't control. Anything that didn't come with a verifiable history, a name you recognized, a family you could check. She looked at him. I didn't come with any of that, and that terrified you. And instead of sitting with the fear and asking yourself if it was telling you something real, you converted it into certainty and spent 2 years acting on it. She stopped. But I was never the threat, she said. I was just a woman in a gray dress who wanted to have dinner with her husband's family. The silence after that had a quality to it. Not the silence of a room waiting for what comes next. The silence of a room that has heard something real and is sitting with it. Several people near the back of the room had put their phones down. Not because they'd stopped watching. Because what was happening now felt like something that shouldn't be filmed. Garrison looked at the floor, the marble floor. The floor he'd told Nora she wasn't fit to clean. He looked at it for a long time. The way you look, you're trying to find solid ground, and the ground keeps shifting under each version of yourself you've been standing on. Then he looked up at Warren. 2 men who had built things, who understood without translation the specific cost of building things, who shared the particular grammar of people. She started from a shirt of nothing and made something out of it through years that were not easy. Contract, Garrison said, his voice thin now. Warren, there must be something that can be. There might be, Warren said. Harrison's eyes lifted, a flash of something. Not hope exactly, the reflex of hope, the body responding before the mind can catch up. But not tonight, Warren said. Not in this room, not structured around making this easier for you. He held Garrison's gaze with the calm, complete steadiness of a man who has decided and is not revisiting. What happens next will not be about your comfort, but will be about the people who depend on a company that should be better than what this room saw tonight. He paused. And it will happen if it happens at all because new leadership makes a credible case for why it should. Garrison heard that, every word, and understood what it meant, and his knees buckled, not all the way, but enough. His hand gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white, the specific grip of a man holding on. Warren looked at his daughter, then at Elliot, then back at Nora.
We're leaving, he said simply, quietly.
Like an exhale. Nora nodded. Elliot reached for her hand. They moved toward the tall front doors, the 3 of them. And the room, 200 people, silk and diamonds and phones, and the wreckage of an evening that had started as a performance of one thing and become something else entirely. The room parted for them, without being asked, without ceremony. The way a room moves aside for people who have earned the right to walk through it. At the door, Warren stopped. He didn't turn around. He stood with his back to the room, the wine-stained dark on his coat, and into the quiet of 200 people not making a sound, he said, "A man's character is not what he shows you when things are going well." A pause, short, sufficient. It's what he shows you when he thinks there's nothing to lose. He walked out, the doors closed behind them. Cold air, dark driveway, the sound of gravel under 3 sets of feet. And behind them the ballroom was left with what it had always had, itself, the immediate after, the specific silence of a room from which the thing that was holding everyone in it has just left. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the older woman near the bar, the one who had reached for her coat 20 minutes ago, and then finished putting it on, buttoned it deliberately, top to bottom, picked up her evening bag, said something very quiet to the man beside her. He put his coat on too. They walked out, without saying goodbye to anyone. And then someone else reached for a coat. And someone else. The specific way a room empties when it has decided it is done. Garrison was still standing. By definition, he had made it back to fully upright. He was gripping the chair. His hand had gone numb from gripping it. He was not certain the chair was still load-bearing, and he was afraid to test the question. Sylvia came to stand beside him. Not touching, just beside. The specific proximity of two people who have been through something together and have not yet figured out what they are to each other now that the something is over. Garrison, she said. A quiet look at her. He was looking at the door his son had walked through. What do we do, she said. Not a question, exactly. More like a sentence that ran out before it reached the end. And it was the first time all evening that Sylvia Whitmore had said we, not I, not you, we, like they were the same thing. Like what happened next happened to both of them. Which it would. Which was, perhaps, the only accurate thing said in the room all night. I don't know, Garrison said. 2 words. The most honest thing Garrison Whitmore had said in a very long time. Possibly the most honest thing he had said in years. He stood there, in his $1,000 suit, on his marble floor, in his enormous house, surrounded by the wreckage of an evening he had planned carefully and executed perfectly and lost completely. And he did not know what to do, which was, if you thought about it, the beginning of something, even if he couldn't see it yet. Even if the beginning looked where he was standing, exactly like an ending outside. 3 cars in the long driveway. Warren's driver had pulled around. Dark sedan, nothing announcing itself. Idling quietly in the November cold. Aura stood beside it, let the cold off the water hit her face, stayed in it. Because cold was clarifying, cold was real. Cold didn't perform anything. It was just cold, and it cut through the heat of a ballroom and 3 hours of being watched and weighed and found insufficient by people who hadn't looked at her long enough to see what she was. Elliot stood close, not touching her right now, just close, present. The specific nearness of someone who understands that sometimes presence is the whole thing. Warren came to stand beside her, and for a moment the 3 of them stood in the dark outside the lit house. The sounds from inside were muffled by cone stone and glass and the particular hush-hush of a November night on the Connecticut coast. The water somewhere below the hill, the wind coming off it. You okay? Elliot asked her. Same question he'd asked when she walked in. You okay? Nora looked at the house, at tall, low windows with the light behind them, at the shapes moving inside, at the candles she could see bending in their holders from the movement of people she could no longer hear. I will be, she said, because that was true. She always was. Not immediately, not without cost, but eventually and certainly. She always was. Warren looked at the house too, at the windows, at the lit rooms, at the place he had driven 2 days early to be near. The place he had stood outside of on the gravel, listening through an open window to things he had hoped not to hear. He had not been hoping to be right. He had spent the drive up here actively hoping he would arrive and find a family that had been trying, that had been imperfect. All families were imperfect, but trying. That had been sitting with his daughter at a table and asking her real questions and making room for her answers. He had stood outside the window and heard something else, and he had stayed. Because his daughter was inside, and she needed to know. Not that he was there. She hadn't known he was there, that she was not alone. That behind her, outside the window, the world still contained people who knew who she was. He reached out and put a hand on her shoulder, the same hand he'd placed there when he walked in. Ready, he said. Nora took a breath, full, from the bottom. Yeah, she said. They got in the car. The driver pulled away. Down the long driveway. Past the iron gates that opened slowly for them the way they had opened slowly for every guest all evening. The estate lights receding in the rear window. The water below the hill, the dark, the quiet, and in the ballroom they had left behind. The candles, the marble, the string quartet who had never resumed playing and were now quietly packing their instruments into cases with the specific efficiency of people who want to be somewhere else. The senator finding his coat. Aldous Finch on the phone in the corridor, speaking quietly and quickly to someone who was not going to enjoy the call. Reeves standing near the wall, with his hands open and his eyes on the floor, doing math in his head that he wasn't enjoying either. Ruth, back at the coat check, handing out coats to the steady stream of guests who had decided the evening was over. The young server, back at his station, carrying a tray of glasses that nobody was reaching for anymore, and Garrison Whitmore, in the center of his ballroom, in his $1,000 suit, on his marble floor, alone in a way that had nothing to do with the number of people still in the room, looking at the door that had closed behind his son, standing with his hand on the back of a chair, knuckles white, on a floor he was proud of, on a floor he had told Nora she wasn't fit to clean, and understanding, finally, the full weight of that sentence. Not the meaning he had intended, the meaning it actually had. The richest soul in the room had just walked out through his front door, in a gray dress, holding her husband's hand, and the emptiness was his. And the night, which had started as his and had been his for 3 hours, was no longer his at all. The videos went up before the cars cleared the driveway. Not one video, not two, just raw footage, uncut, 100 different phones, 100 different angles. The marble floor, the empty clutch shaken upside down, the bracelet catching candlelight on the side table where it had been sitting the whole time. The wine arcing through the air in slow motion because someone had slowed it down, and now it was everywhere. And the moment Warren said, "I heard it all," and the moment Nora said, "Hi, Dad," that moment, that two-word moment, the one that traveled fastest, because 200 people who had been performing certainty all evening suddenly didn't know what their faces were supposed to do, and in the center of it all, Nora, standing still, steady as something planted deep, like she'd known, because she had. By midnight, 100,000 views. By 2 in the morning, 1,000,000. By sunrise, the number had stopped being a number and become something you feel rather than count. The headline wrote itself. Billionaire son chooses wife over empire. Wife torn out to be daughter of the man holding the empire together. Then the subheadlines. Garrison's old interviews about values and merit, set beside the footage. The contrast did the work. The contrast didn't need help. Nora slept, which was remarkable. The woman at the center of the most watched clip of the week, asleep by midnight. Elliot did not sleep. He sat by the window and watched the numbers climb and felt something he couldn't name. Not satisfaction, not anger, something between all three. A feeling of a door finally opening onto a room that is smaller and colder than you imagined, containing mostly the shape of things that should have been said years earlier. He closed the laptop, looked at his wife, sleepy. He thought, I chose right. He had known it when he said it, but knowing and feeling are different operations, and at 2 in the morning he felt it, fully, without reservation. Warren was awake. He was always awake at this hour. He sat at the kitchen table of the house he'd rented for the week, just in case. Nora hadn't known he was there. He hadn't told her. He'd driven up 3 days before and waited, because he had raised a daughter who never asked for help and had learned over 30 years that the one time to be available was the time she didn't ask. He held his tea, thought about Nora at 6 years old, at 16, the parking lot 3 years ago, the bookshelf that was mostly vertical. The way she'd said, okay, you can go, and meant it completely. He didn't look at the news. He already knew what it said. He drank his tea, let the quiet be out, and trusted his daughter, which was the only thing he'd ever really needed to do. At 7 in the morning, the board of Whitmore Enterprises gathered on the 14th floor. Margaret Solis at the head of the table. She had warned Garrison many times. Different rooms, different years, different configurations of careful language. The wall had always come up. Now the wall was on the internet. 43 million views. There is no version of this, she said, where the company survives with him at the top. She didn't need to say it loudly. The contract is frozen. 3 additional clients pulled orders before 10 this morning. Every hour he remains CEO, this company loses things it cannot get back. The hands went up, every one of them. Not close. Aldous delivered the news himself. He drove to the estate, found Garrison in the study, still in yesterday's clothes. You're removed as CEO effective immediately, Aldous said. They're asking for your board seat as well. Garrison looked at his desk. At 40 years of accumulated evidence of a life built in one direction. Did you know? Voice rough, about her, about Warren. Not until he walked in, a long silence. I built this from nothing, Garrison said. I know. Aldous paused. But what happened last night wasn't protection. It was something else. And I think you know that too. Garrison looked at the window. Gray sky. Heavy with November. At the door, Aldous stopped. Didn't turn around. She seemed like a good person. Your daughter-in-law. The way she handled herself. A pause. Most people wouldn't have. He left. The study was very quiet. The legal part came fast. Unlawful detention. False imprisonment. Search without consent. Physical restraint of her husband. Public defamation. All of it documented. All of it on film. What do you want from this? Her attorney asked. I want the record to say what happened, Nora said. Official. Permanent. I don't want money to make it go away. I want it to be something that can't go away. Reeves told the truth. All of it. Said he'd hesitated. Said he'd told Garrison. Sir, I would need her consent. Said Garrison had said. I don't care what you need. Said he'd followed the order anyway. The footage backed every word. He kept his freedom by saying the true thing he should have said that night. Sylvia read her apology aloud, into a microphone, with a court reporter and a judge present. 3 paragraphs. Controlled. Flat. The last line. 4 words. Under her signature. The public record. Permanent. The woman who had murmured what a brave little dress had to put her name under. I was wrong. 6 months passed. Nora and Elliot moved to their own apartment, their own lease, their own furniture. The IKEA bookshelf from 3 years ago had a corner reinforced with wood glue, but it was standing. She still drove the Honda Civic, still knew every server's name, still tipped like it meant something, because it did, because it always had. Elliot started at Caldwell Industries in April, not in a corner office, project management division, under a manager named Patricia, who found out who he was married to in his 2nd week and called Warren to complain. Warren listened. Do you have a problem with his work? Pause. No. He's actually quite good. Then I'll take that as your answer. Patricia went back and treated Elliot exactly as before, which was exactly what he'd asked for. On merit, Garrison sold the Connecticut estate in August, moved to a smaller house in a town where nobody recognized the name. The clubs had asked him to step back. The charity board seats had requested his resignation. Invitations stopped, one by one, like lights going out in rooms you used to see from the road. One September evening, he started typing on a message to Nora, got 3 sentences in, deleted it, started again, deleted it again. He did this for months. The drafts all started in the wrong place. His experience, his context, his reasons. And he kept arriving at the same wall. The apology she would have needed had nothing to do with any of that. It had to do with hers. With what it felt like to stand in his ballroom in a gray dress and have her bag searched in front of 200 people over a bracelet, sitting in plain sight. To have done nothing wrong and been treated as if she had done everything wrong. He never managed to write that sentence, the one that started from her, so he deleted them, one by one, all of them. It was a night in October when he sat with the longest draft, the most honest one, read it twice, 3 times, then closed the laptop without sending it. Because the apology that mattered was the one he'd refused to give when she was standing right in front of him. Calm, unbroken, just waiting to be seen as a person. He had had every opportunity, 2 years of dinners and holidays and events, every chance to simply look at her and see a human being. He had chosen every single time not to. Sending the letter changed nothing about that. He left the draft in the folder, in the dark of a closed laptop, on a smaller house where the name opened no doors. What haunted him wasn't the money, wasn't the company or the name. What haunted him at 3 a.m. was the kindness she had extended every single time for 2 years. He had watched her know Ruth's name and called it strategy, watched her tip generously and labeled it calculation. I had taken every real and genuine thing she did and run it through a filter, and the filter had converted all of it into evidence of what he'd already decided. That was the part that stayed. Not that he'd been wrong about who her father was. That he had spent 68 years looking at people through a filter that filed them before they'd said a word, and had never once questioned it. Warren's public statement was 11 words. A reporter outside a building on a Wednesday. Mr. Caldwell, will the Whitmore contract ever be reinstated? Warren stopped, looked at the camera. I don't do business with men who measure people by the price of their shoes. That's not punishment, that's just good sense. He got in the car. The clip was everywhere by dinner, a year after the gala. Nora and Warren at her kitchen table. The comfortable mess of a dinner they'd cooked together. Do you think he's changed? She asked. I think he's had to look at something he spent a long time not looking at. That's not the same as changing, no. But it's where changing starts. Are you angry at him? She thought about it. I was never as angry as he thought I was. I was tired. Angry wants something from the person. Tired just wants rest. Warren looked at his daughter. This woman who had taught herself to hold things without crushing them, to be still in rooms that were trying to move her. You've always known exactly who you are, he said. You taught me. No, I gave you the conditions. You did the rest. She smiled. Small. Real. The kind that doesn't need anything to be different. Nora still drove the Honda Civic. Still knew every server's name. Still tipped like it meant something. Some things don't need a dramatic ending. Some things just need to keep going. What Nora did. Standing in that marble ballroom, steady, unbroken, knowing who she was when everyone around her was trying to say she was something else. That's not a story about a billionaire's daughter. That's a story about every person who has ever held on to themselves in a room that was trying to take that from them. And held on, and was still standing when the doors opened. The richest soul in any room is almost never the loudest one. Sometimes it's the quiet woman in the plain dress, the one who knows everyone's name, and never once needed you to know hers.